I hope so too.
Also looks good.
I guess we can go out for. Come on. Want one? Okay. Good morning and welcome. Thank you for coming and attending the Solid Waste Advisory Committee meeting. It's a group that's been meeting now for well over a year. On a generally a monthly basis. We've moved to bi-monthly at this point. Going through the process of following the solid waste master plan of Deschutes County to look to locate a solid waste landfill facility here in the county, so the county continues to take responsibility for the wastes that are generated within our jurisdiction. The current landfill in Deschutes County, which is not landfill, is on path to reach full capacity by approximately November of 2029. So we have roughly 6 years to complete both the process as well as the permitting and excavation and development for operation of a new facility. So that's the task of this committee, is to work through the technical review of potential sites here within the county that might be viable for the county to be able to site a long-term 100-year solid waste landfill. So with that, I want to bring the meeting to order, and I'd like to call attendance to see if we have quorum. Paul Battagna.
Present.
Thank you, Paul. Ed Finch or John Roberts. Erica Lindberg.
Hi, Tim. I'm here.
Public Services. Thank you. Paul Battagna is from the City of Sisters. Erwin Sweatham of Cascade Disposal. Roman Guffey, his alternate. Jared Black.
Here.
Keith Caceres.
Here.
Chris Ogren.
Here.
Robin Vora. Luke Dines. Robin Jones from the City of Bend.
Here.
And Mike Riley from the Environmental Center. I believe we have quorum. Is that correct, Sue? Yep. Okay. All right, with that, entertain a motion for the approval of the June meeting, June 20th, 2023. Is there a motion to approve?
I can make the motion to approve the June meeting minutes for 2023.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jared. So Keith moved, Jared seconded. Any discussion, comments?
If I remember right, was June the meeting that had the audio issues online?
Yes, it was. That's
I
correct.
called into that one, and so I'm going to have to abstain from this vote because I wasn't able to hear super well.
Okay. And this is Chris, correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Chris. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
All opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. Okay, with that, I'll hand it over to Ryan Rudnick of Parametrics to talk a bit about the final site evaluations of our 2 candidate sites that have already moved through this process.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And real quick, just an overview of the agenda. We'll go through final site evaluations, progress updates with the 2 sites.
Hey, Ryan, just 1 second. Before I go any further, I should probably introduce myself. I don't think I did. Yeah. I'm Tim Brownell, Director of Solid Waste here for Deschutes County. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, just overview of the agenda. We'll provide an update on the finalist sites and the evaluations that are taking place on those, being Roth East and the Moon Pit site. We'll provide updates on the remaining BLM sites and how those compare to the other sites that we are currently moving forward with. After that period, or after that part of the presentation, we'll have a public comment period. And so please hold your comments for that time. There will be ample time for people to speak. And then following that, there will be a discussion by the SWAC regarding what to do with the remaining sites. And then we'll adjourn. So here we'll give some updates on what's going on with Roth East and the Moon Pit sites. In June of 2023, the SWAC recommended further study of the Moon Pit and Roth East sites. These are referred to as the finalist candidate sites for the new solid waste management facility. Since then, we've completed a drone survey on site. We plan to begin conceptual design this week on those two sites, laying out facilities, landfill cells, utilities, et cetera. And then additional field work that will be conducted on these sites include geophysical survey, geotechnical drillings, cultural resources fieldwork, natural resources fieldwork, and a transportation on-site assessment. So a lot of work going into better understanding these sites and determining which one is the ideal site for Deschutes County. This is just a high-level view of the drone survey that we've done out on site, getting really great imagery of the site, as well as topographic data that will inform our site design, geotechnical and other field studies. Here's a snapshot of the Roth East site. So really happy with the results of the drone survey and eager to see what we discover from the other field studies. Okay.
And you want to speak just a little bit, how long do you think that'll take? Roughly?
So most of the field work will be occurring this fall. We'll be drafting reports later in the fall. We'll have an open house on September 11th this year that we encourage the public to join in and hear about some of the preliminary findings of these two sites and more information on the siting process. The ultimate goal being presenting the findings of this final site evaluations in spring of 2024, and the SWAC being in a position to then recommend the preferred site, and then commissioners, I think in the May meeting, approving one site to then be acquired and developed. So we're closing in on sites with those two as the main candidates, Roth East and Moon Pit. So this next chapter is probably one of great interest for the crowd today. And I think, so this is the BLM sites. We're going to review the focus screening updates in comparison to other sites. I think a good way to start this would just be an acknowledgement of all the input that we've heard over the last month or two. Since June, we had gathered roughly 300 comments and then around 100 in the last week or so. And so there have been over 400 public comments pertaining to the Powell Butte Highway BLM site. And so rest assured, your concerns have been heard loud and clear. This word cloud kind of summarizes some of the key concerns. Larger words are those that reoccurred more often. And there's also repetition in there for those that were recurring themes. And so the county's heard these concerns loud and clear, as well as the SWAC. These public comments have been shared with the SWAC, so they're aware of the public concerns that have been raised. And these can also be summarized in these bullet points pertaining to the BLM site. We understand there's concerns about environmental impacts, health and safety, aesthetic impacts, the use of BLM land, landfill site alternatives to this particular site, proximity to residential areas, wildlife and wildflower conservation, traffic and infrastructure concerns, airport safety, and property values and financial impacts related to it. So we hear you loud and clear. We're now going to provide a little more background on how these sites have been involved in this process and how these two came to the surface, so to speak, recently, at least to public knowledge. and also how these sites score. We have a very detailed process for considering all the different factors of different sites. And there's 3 main lenses that we view these sites through that I'll go into later to help inform the SWAC on which sites would be the best fit for the county's needs. And so here's a map that was presented in February of 2023, identifying 3 areas of interest for potential BLM sites. At the beginning of this site identification process, BLM sites were scored very low and seen as a very unlikely option to acquire for a landfill site, given the long and drawn out process of acquiring federal land. We've been encouraged by the Board of Commissioners to explore further some creative opportunities to work with BLM officers to identify land that they're willing to part with that could be a good fit for the county and be a win-win. And so we followed through with that request and began meetings with. You want to talk more to this?
Yeah, and I'll speak a little bit more specifically. So the request came from Commissioner Phil Chang, to see if there might be a way and process to potentially expedite procurement of BLM property. And so directed us to meet with confer with the BLM staff. BLM actually has land that they are willing to dispose of. And we looked at all of that in our initial review of sites within the county. Most of those are of the wrong size or configuration or locations to be able to be considered viable and move forward through this process. This process is actually identified approximately 213 sites within the county that we could potentially move forward with. The BLM properties that were not on their disposal list were not initially considered because of the time to procure. It would take at least 6 to 10 years to procure BLM properties. However, there is a legislative process in which up to 600 acres of land can be granted. But it takes an act of Congress, a literal act of Congress to do so. And so you would need all of your representatives and others to be aligned with that transaction and release of lands by the BLM directed by Congress. So in discussions with the BLM and then subsequently with our federal legislators, we were looking to see if there were potential properties that we could on-ramp into this process that would be identified as technically viable and politically viable to move through this process. So these BLM properties are not currently under the SWAC's full consideration, like the original 213 that came down to 30, that came down to 12, that ultimately came down to the 2 sites that were just presented that we are in full investigation of. These 3 areas were identified as potential. The one in particular off of 97 between Bend and Redmond, from a system perspective, a transportation system, and others was of the 3, the most ideal relative to potential. But that property was ultimately determined not to be available. It fell under what our technical criteria and direction from the Board of County Commissioners was a fatal flaw. It was within 5 miles of the property boundary of the Redmond Airport. So that was removed. The 2 remaining sites that were identified geographically as potential, we've now gone through a more technical review to determine whether they actually stack up against the existing finalist sites to determine whether we would even consider on-ramping them into this process, bringing them to the SWAC for full consideration. So that's what Ryan is now going to do, is kind of walk through how these these properties have scored, and then we'll provide you with what the staff is recommending to do with these.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah, before going back to the congressional staff and kind of calling them off of this effort, the county wanted us to methodically study these two remaining sites before they were just written off. So they were brought in and taken through the same process that these other approximately 12 sites ran through, so that we'd have justification for removing those from further consideration, or not, depending on which way it went. And so we try to approach it objectively in scoring the sites and to see how they turned out. And that's what we'll now go through. But real quick, just a brief review of the focus screening sites. There've been, like Tim mentioned, initially 213 sites identified, and then we had 31 through broad site screening. Some of you may have seen this on the webpage, the Manage the Future story map, kind of describing how we've narrowed down. And among these 12 sites, they've fallen off for different reasons. A common one is that the owners were unwilling to sell, and so that was a fatal flaw. Those fell off. 4 of the sites were found to be within 5 miles of the airport properties, as stated in master plans, or shown in master plans, and so that took some others out. And you can see the other 2 BLM sites in that context. And so, yeah, it's narrowed down, and we'll go through all the sites and kind of how they've fallen off for different reasons. There's 2 DSL owned properties far out towards Hampton that are encumbered by leased grazing rights, and also a long haul distance, presenting operational difficulties for the county, et cetera. So we've narrowed down from all those to the 2 finalist sites, with the recent review now of these 2 BLM sites to see, are these any better than the 2 sites that are already moving forward as finalists. So this is a quick review. I won't go into all the details, but this is the Moon Pit site. This is one of the sites selected as a finalist. It's an existing surface mine. And we're studying this one in detail now. So the SWAC approved this one for further study. Relatively low objection to that site. It's very hard to see and far from residences in general. The Roth West site is along Pine Mountain Road. SWAC recommended removal of this site from further consideration due to the visibility and proximity to residences to the west there, among other reasons. There's also the Roth East site, which is just adjacent to that property, and offers more separation from residences, separation from the road, less visible. And then, so the SWAC recommended proceeding with that site. So that's one of the finalist sites. DSL South site, as well as DSL North site. Those were both removed from further consideration per the SWAC's motions. The Highway 97 BLM site was also studied, and it was found that the Redmond Airport master plan boundary was further out than what was shown by Dial public mapping resources, and so it was further out than we initially understood, and that precluded this site from development as a solid waste management facility. And so the SWAC moved to remove that site, and so now we have the Powell Butte BLM site and some findings to review here. The site is the workable site area identified as 329 acres. Acquisition potential is challenging due to the BLM ownership, but it's possible to expedite via congressional action. It also needs to be supported by their constituents. I think is maybe an unwritten criteria there for it to move forward. Property area, talked about that. Access would be from Powell Butte Highway and Morrill Road. From what we saw, there's approximately 10 residences within 1 mile and about 40 within 2 miles. And there are 2 major resort communities within 3 miles, including Juniper Reserve and Brasada Ranch. Closest existing well is approximately 0.4 miles. It abuts the border with Crook County. There are no sage grouse zones within 3.1 miles, which is a major obstacle just from a permitting standpoint and regulatory framework. Sage grouse zones are a major obstacle for landfill sites. So that criteria is given quite a bit of weighting. And that contributes to the score being as high as it is for natural environments. And we'll get into the scoring a bit later. No known wells or water rights on site, power infrastructure to the north along Majestic View Lane. 17.5 weighted miles from the waste centroid. And that's for considering how far trucks would have to go to and from the site. And there's substantial public opposition to the site. The next site considered is the Highway 20 BLM site. It's technically accessed off of Horse Ridge Frontage Road. Stookie Road runs through the site. It's a very primitive dirt road that runs through there. Similar to the previous site in terms of acquisition challenges. Oh, thanks. There it is. Thank you. The footprint identified is approximately 451 acres. 0 residences within 1 mile, and then 18 residences within 2 miles. Existing wells are nearby. There's a variety of recreational uses in the vicinity, such as OHV, hiking, biking, shooting. No known wells or water rights on site. Power infrastructure is over 1 mile to the north on Highway 20. 1.2 miles from the draft low density sage grouse habitat, 11 miles from the waste centroid, which is the low, I think that's the closest site of these, and no public opposition on record. And with both of these sites, one thing that wasn't mentioned in those considerations is rock is prevalent on the site, which is an extreme challenge for landfill development and operation. It also results in very high operating costs for the county.
For both sites.
Yes, for both sites. Yeah.
Excuse me, can you speak louder?
Sure. I'll pull this up as well. And so let me talk briefly about the 3 lenses that we've analyzed these sites through in focus screening. The first one is criteria scoring, which is, I like to describe it as kind of a way to navigate the regulatory framework. It's based on federal rules relating to solid waste management facilities, county zoning code, development code, state level laws. So it reflects kind of the regulatory challenges as well as the key practical considerations, the technical concerns for a site. And so that's kind of what's reflected here in the criteria scoring is the feasibility based on the regulatory framework and practicality issues pertaining to a landfill siting. The second lens that we'll look through is a comparative cost factor analysis, where we look at the key cost factors that play into the cost to develop and operate a solid waste management facility. And so that's another lens to look through to get an idea of which sites would be more expensive than others. It's not, we don't present dollar figures at this high level, but a look at these factors gives us a sense of which one's more expensive than the other, essentially. And then the third lens that we look through is the residential proximity analysis, where we quantify the number of residences within a 1 mile buffer of the site perimeter and a 2 mile perimeter of the site buffer. Certainly there could be impacts and concerns beyond those 2 miles, but we get a decent sense within 2 miles of what's going on and the impacts there.
Since there's a lot of new people, can you explain how the scoring higher is better, lower is better?
Can you say that again?
The scoring on the lens?
Is
Yeah.
high, is,
Five.
yeah, the higher
Oh,
the
yeah.
score.
Yeah. So 5 would be the highest score. 1 would be the lowest score, and 0 represents a fatal flaw, which makes the site completely unfeasible to develop, kind of wipes it out. Thank you, Harrison. So the first criteria we'll look at, summarized here, is site characteristics and engineering. I understand that is maybe a little hard to read, but you'll be able to see this online as well. This is all published. to the website if you want to dig further in. But the main point of this is to emphasize the, let's see if those show up. Okay, there we go. There's the red. So really the main four to look at are the two sites we have, Roth East and Moon Pit, and then Powell Butte BLM and Highway 20 BLM. And so I'll just summarize here in that for this category, which includes all the criteria pertaining to site characteristics and engineering, Moon Pit scored a 3.9, Roth East scored 3.79, Powell Butte BLM has a weighted score of 2.49, and Highway 20 BLM 3.2. And a big factor to this is the challenging acquisition potential. It has a low score in that category, given the long process to acquire BLM land. Also, the challenging soil conditions, those are reflected here with very low scores for soils, topography, site capacity, and configuration. So those are the two main criteria categories that sunk the score for those two sites.
Ryan, that's a combination of all the rock out there, but also not a lot of soil itself on site. to
Right.
use.
Yeah. The prevalence of rock makes it hard to excavate, but also doesn't provide the soil needs for daily and intermediate cover. So the next criteria here is natural environment. And again, this is the intent of this is to capture the regulatory framework and all the hoops that would need to be jumped through per se, and boxes to be checked with regard to a certain site. So we look at wetlands and waters impacts, threatened and endangered species, wildlife area combining zones, greater sage grouse area combining zone, and that was given pretty substantial weight because of the challenging regulatory framework around those zones, sensitive bird and mammal and habitat combining zones, etc. And so Moon Pit scored 3.6, Roth East 3.4. Powell Butte BLM actually scored fairly high on this one, and it has a lot to do with sage grouse. It's very far from mapped sage grouse zones, and so it scored well in that regard. And so with regard to the process and mitigation and whatnot related to sage grouse, that would be easy for this site in that regard. And so that's reflected there, and that's what boosted the score there. The Highway 20 BLM site didn't score quite as well, largely because it's closer to sage grouse zones. And again, that's just to capture, not to say that there aren't environmental impacts pertaining to those sites, just that the permitting related to it would be easier than the others. The third category for criteria is land use. And this looks at things such as proximity to airports, which because of the adoption of the 5-mile exclusion zone for airports, if it's outside that, it's a 5. If it's within it, it's a 0. So it's kind of an extreme one or the other based on how the criteria is set up. Site zoning accounts for whether it's in a zone that could support landfill development or a zone that could be easily adapted to it. Adjacent land use impacts, that's accounted for with existing adjacent use, planned adjacent use, distance to nearest residence, distance to nearest public road. And there's very specific criteria and tables in our citing criteria memo that clarify specifically what conditions earn what scores. And so with regard to distance to nearest residences, that might be one of concern. That's based on the county's rule to site a landfill at least a quarter mile from residences or roads, I believe. And so that's kind of the structure that it's based upon. Site visibility and aesthetic impact, that's accounted for. Visibility based on topography and vegetation, remoteness, transportation considerations, and on-site land use impacts. And so based on all that, Moon Pit scored 3.4, Roth East 3.6. Powell Butte BLM was scored the lowest of these 4 that we're looking at in focus here, 3.33 for Powell Butte BLM, and then Highway 20 BLM higher there at 3.63. And so that's a tie with Rothies, so to speak, but really we look then at the weighted combination of these three scores. And so this graph and table kind of illustrates how these three categories combine, each of which are weighted in different ways. You can see up top, site characteristics and engineering is weighted at 35%, natural environment 35, land use 30, and that results in a total weighted score. And you can see how those weighted scores stack up to a total score in the graph. The key takeaway that we found from the scoring exercise is that the Powell Butte BLM site and the Highway 20 BLM site don't score any better than the Moon Pit site and the Roth East site. Moon Pit being 3.64 as a total weighted score, and that's the top scoring site based on the criteria. Roth East 3.6 as a total weighted score. Powell Butte BLM 3.51, and then Highway 20 BLM with a total weighted score of 3.5. And so that's the first lens, the criteria scoring. The second is the comparative cost factor analysis. There's 5 major cost factors that were identified, which influence the cost to develop and operate a solid waste management facility. These include, along with estimated weighting here, excavation, that's 30%, waste hauling, approximately 25%, road infrastructure, approximately 15%, power infrastructure, 15%, and water infrastructure, 15%. And so looking at that, we found that the 2 new BLM sites really didn't score that great. 2.5 and 2.3. Lower score means higher cost to develop, and higher score, kind of similar to the criteria scoring. 1 being low, representing the highest cost, and 5 being a good score, representing the lowest cost. So the weighted average for Moon Pit was 4.15. For Roth East, it was 3. For Powell Butte BLM is 2.5, and Highway 20 BLM 2.3. And a key factor in each of those is the excavation costs, which is relatively low for Moon Pit and Roth East and relatively high for Powell Butte BLM and Highway 20 BLM. And so here's a graphical representation of that showing each of those factors, but then the weighted score in green. And you can see there how Moon Pit and Roth East rise well above Powell Butte Highway BLM and Highway 20. There may be some cost factors that are comparable, but the weighted total there suggests that it would be a relatively expensive site to develop and operate. The third lens that we look through is the residential proximity analysis. We understand that solid waste management facilities could negatively impact nearby residences, and understandably, residents and property owners express those concerns. Some of the concerns that are common and that are generally heard with regard to a new solid waste management facility include haul truck traffic, noise, dust, air pollution, odors, litter, invasive species, groundwater contamination, scenic impacts, decreased property values. But it's worth noting that mitigating each of these is a key component to site development and operations. It's not just accepted that all this will happen. There's key efforts to mitigating each and every one of these potential impacts to minimize them to the maximum extent possible and economically feasible. The residential proximity analysis for Moon Pit, you can see here, there's very few residences, just 1 within 2 miles. This is the Roth East site. Generally more residences to the west, and that played into Roth West being unfavorable relative to Roth East, which has far fewer residences, which are shown by the stars. 1 mile buffers in red, 2 mile buffers in yellow. The next site, let's see, we're looking at, that's the DSL South site. Very few residences, but again, that one's been passed on already. This is the Highway 97 site. This has also been passed on already, but just say there's 50 plus residences within 1 mile and 300 plus within 2. a lot of residences in that, the proximity of that site. This is the Powell Butte BLM site. Individual residences weren't mapped for the site, but approximately 10 residences were found to be within 1 mile and approximately 40 residences within 2 miles based on aerial imagery. And there are 2 major resort communities within 3 miles. And so again, the 1 and 2 is what we quantify, but I want to make a point to note that there's those 2 resort communities within 3 miles. At which point the numbers would climb up quite a bit. The Highway 20 BLM site has no known residences within 1 mile and approximately 18 residences within 2 miles based on aerial imagery. And so looking through this lens, we see that there are many more residential impacts with regard to the Powell Butte BLM site compared to Moon Pit, which has 0 residences within 1 mile and 1 residence within 2. Roth East has 2 residences within 1 mile, 8 within 2 miles. Powell Butte BLM, as we mentioned, has 10 within 1 mile and 40 within 2 miles. And so for these reasons, it's no better than the 2 sites that have been identified as finalist sites. So in summary, through the 3 lenses that we've looked at for focus screening, it appears that neither of the remaining BLM sites are any more favorable than the 2 sites selected as finalist sites. Tim, what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, so based on the findings that we've come to with what Parametrics has provided us, as well as kind of looking at what does the process itself look like. The staff is recommending to remove both of these BLM sites from further consideration. Particularly the issue of the lack of soil and the predominance of rock on that site. Particularly Powell Butte, looks like it's 130 feet of rock all the way down. Not only is it the cost to excavate, but realistically with that type of situation, with the lack of soils, we'd have to create our operating. We'd either have to import soil or we'd have to create our own operating needs by grinding rock to a fine point. With that being said, realistically, we could probably only go down about 30 feet. And to get that 100-year capacity, we would then have to have a landfill that would be about 100 feet up above the surrounding environment. Not landfill has a height of approximately 35 feet. And that's the kind of criteria and parameter that we'd like to hold for future landfills, is not create a pyramid of sorts, but to have something that over time, upon closure, could potentially fall into the natural landscape around it. The other piece is the legislative process. I think since this would require an act of Congress to take particularly the Powell Butte site through, I don't think that is viable. We've started to hear concerns from the legislators, both state and federal, that this may be of concern. So with all those factors, I think that we want to remove the Powell Butte site from further consideration, and for the first 2 reasons of expense and impact, visual impact in the long term, both of those sites should be removed from consideration. So that's what we'd like to inform the SWAC and for your consideration. If you want to give us direction to continue to move these forward, please let us know, but otherwise we would like to drop them and not on-ramp them onto the system. So with that, we're going to open up public comment. And we have a number of people who are in here now who I'll call you by name, and if you want to make comment, continue to make comment, please come up to the front to the microphone, say your name, address, and what your issues and concerns are. What time is it now? We're trying to hold public comment to 30 minutes, but I believe we do have enough quorum that if we exceed that, we can, but please hold your comments to approximately 2 minutes. All right. The first person on the list looks like Kevin Cornelius. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd first like to compliment you on the analysis. I thought you did a great job on that, and thank you for stepping us through that. And I appreciate the consideration for potentially dropping the Powell Butte BLM site for the various reasons you've identified. Thank you. My name is Kevin Cornelius. I live at 16407 Southwest Brasada Ranch Road. I live out at Brasada Ranch. So a number of the items that I would like to discuss have already been obviously submitted in my letter, as well as you've covered them here. I'm staunchly opposed to the Powell Butte site. I'm concerned significantly about pollutants in both the air and the water, and our groundwater is of huge concern, given the proximity of the landfill to our wells that support Brasada Ranch, as well as some of the surrounding communities that also feed from that well system. Concerned significantly about pests and vermin, which create a nuisance for us, and with the 3-mile distance between us and the west side of our Brasada Ranch owners, that's a serious concern as well. In addition, landfills create a fire hazard. We've certainly seen different instances where landfills have caught fire, sometimes for days or weeks at a time, and that's of additional concern to myself as well. And again, you talked about sage grouse, but there's also other potentially endangered species in the area that I think are of big concern. And I'll close because a number one of our owners also brought up the idea of the Arlington site, and wondering, again, point that out, that might be of consideration also for the SWAC to look at, as opposed to going to the funds and time to create a new landfill in Deschutes County. There's already an existing one about the same distance north that Portland utilizes to the east that might be under consideration as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Jim Moss.
My name is Jim Moss. I'm a resident at Brasada Ranch, 15397 Hat Rock Loop. I also sent in a response, and my response was, or more a question, I guess, is why not use the Arlington site? I understand there'd be some trucking issues, but Portland sends its garbage there by truck. Seattle metro area sends it by rail. So it seems to me that that's a 130-year site. They've used it about 20 years, so they got 110 years left. Why we would not make that a consideration rather than site a landfill in Deschutes County. That was my only response.
Okay, thank you. We will respond to that once we're through public comment. Thank you. Roy Cugin.
Roy Cogan, thank you very much. 16648 Southwest Capitol Court, Brasada Ranch. I'd like to thank the committee and paramedics for the work they've done. My experience with this, I'm a retired public finance lawyer. I spent my career representing governments in financing facilities, including a waste energy facility to close 3 landfills above aquifers. And that process took maybe 8 years of litigation. In opposition, costs increased dramatically. And now with Spokane County, and they're still a client, they have the waste energy facility, and then they rail and truck stuff to Arlington. So the opposition to these projects, in my experience, can create huge financial increases in project costs, and anything above an aquifer is a tremendous risk of leaching through them through the landfill. So thank you for your consideration to remove it. I think it's a very good decision. And again, I am in opposition to the Paw Butte site officially. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Nagorski.
Good morning, Steve Nagorski, 15835 Southwest Brasada Ranch Road, Palo Butte. So thanks for your time this morning. I'm speaking for myself and not for any other organization that I belong to. So hesitant to make comments. It sounds like where we're at right now is staff has made a recommendation and that's not been acted on yet as far as the Palo Butte site. The reason I'm hesitant is I received an email from Vicki Iverson's staff yesterday saying that there's been communication between the two counties, between Deschutes and Crook County. I am not hearing anything so far about that or whether that's actually occurred, but that in the message from her administrator that there would be some public announcement today. So that's why I'm a little confused about where that's coming from. And again, we'll leave it at that. And I know maybe you'll have some comments later.
Okay, thank you. Harrison Ruffin. Oh, hey.
Morning. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your time. You've been at this a long time. My name is Harrison Ruffin. My address is 18135 Plainview Road, Bend, Oregon. I also own land out in the Milliken Valley and on the west side of town. Question about the parametrics. I noticed on the third lens, there was a hauling line and it indicated a 5 for the Moon Pit and a 5 for Roth East. In the weighted averages, they were different, the hauling ones, but on that third slide of lenses, and I forgot the name of that slide, they both received a 5. And I was just curious about that because there's a significant, grade that the trucks would have to climb. And I feel like the Roth East site is definitely further away than the Moon Pit site. And that grade, presents challenges in the winter and also a pretty significant fuel burn on the trucks. And I know you guys are answering all these questions at the end, so I'll just go on to the second thing. The Roth East site being out in the Milliken Valley really presents some challenges that may or may not have been addressed. I didn't see a specific line in there regarding the wind velocity out in the valley and the presence of thermals, or maybe more commonly referred to as dust devils. The Milliken Valley presents a really unique area. It's one of the reasons that it's popular for flying. Today, we have lift to 15,000 feet. If you look at the wind grams, that's out in the Milliken Valley. That means that a dust devil will actually carry dust up to cloud base, which is at 15,000 feet. It will continue to do so until about 6 o'clock this evening, where the lift or dust devils will carry dust up to 13,000 feet. We have prevailing winds out of the east this afternoon. Trash that is carried up to 13,000 feet could potentially land in Bend. I don't believe that there's any other site under consideration that has this type of weather phenomenon. And, when you open up a pit and create a dark spot on the ground, you create a solar heating, which is what triggers these dust devils. When that warm air pocket breaks away and draws in the cooled air around it, that creates that vortice, and that's what will send trash and does send dust up today, for instance, to 15,000 feet. With the proximity to the highway, I really hope that we can settle on the Moon Pit rather than Roth East. I feel like it's a much better containment situation. The wind is much lower. The presence of dust devils almost non-existent there. Anyway, my concerns.
Okay,
Thank you,
Harrison.
guys. Appreciate your time.
Yep. We'll get back to you on the Holocaust piece. Mike McLean.
Good morning. My name is Mike McLean. I live at 386 Southwest Bent Loop in Powell Butte. And I oppose this personally. I'm here today, however, representing two clients. I'm an attorney in Bend at Lynch Murphy McLean Law Firm, and I represent Brasada Ranch Community Council. I also represent Pronghorn Master Community Association. Many of the folks here in this room are part of those groups. You've received a lot of communication from members of those groups. There has been a lot of thoughtful discussion about the impact on the lives and the families that live in the Brasada Ranch community and in the Pronghorn community, also Juniper Preserve, as it's called by many. And I believe, based upon what I'm hearing today, that the concerns of those residents have been heard. And I want to thank the committee and you for analyzing the sites. We urge you, my clients, their memberships urge you to remove the BLM site for Powell Butte from consideration. In my years in being in a courtroom and serving in the legislature, I've learned to take yes for an answer. With that, do you have any questions of me? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike. Melissa Pearson.
Hi, I'm Melissa Pearson from Brasada Ranch. I live there on Ranch View Road. And I think our communication speaks for itself. And I just want to thank you. I am curious at the kind of late stage of the game, how the BLM sites came forward, but the fact that they're not going to be considered, I guess it doesn't matter. So thank you very much for your time.
Larry Lakes or Laney Lakes?
Either one will work.
All right.
My questions have been answered.
Okay, thank you. Steve Bunch or Bunch?
Morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
As a resident of Brasada Ranch, I came up here in 2009. This isn't about being selfish or being anything else. I've read through the BLM's manifesto of what they represent to the American people. And I've read it dozens of times now, and a landfill in the middle of BLM land, no matter where it is, doesn't account for what they represent. And anybody's welcome to read it. I've read it. I've tried contacting the BLM and they act like they're deer in the headlights. Okay, nobody talks to you because nobody wants to commit to anything. And it's frustrating, you know, but it's not frustrating for me. I'll be dead and gone. I got 6 grandkids. I enjoy Powell Butte. The people that live up there enjoy it. And unfortunately, through my years in life, if I lived in the Bay Area and they assess 20% increase on my waste, you know, getting rid of my waste every week, you just kind of absorb it. Bend, Deschutes County is in a position where they have to acknowledge the fact, and you said it in your statement, which I listened to, you know, pretty pronounceably, cost benefit. In other words, the farther out you go, the more it costs. But unfortunately, those have to be absorbed by the people that are living in the county. It, you know, as hard as it is, whether it's 100,000, 200, 300,000, they have to absorb it for the next 100 years. And whether it means selling bonds, increasing the garbage rates, doing whatever. I mean, I'm sure that was the biggest thing that I was taken back about with the BLM proposal, because it says nothing about this in any of what they're trying to do for future generations. So anyway, that having been said, I'm glad you guys are reconsidering the Powell Butte site, and I hope that you use the other facilities available to you. If you have eminent domain, You have different things. I've heard different stories from different people, but I've been out of town for a while. And I've heard people have offered to sell their land to you and at whatever cost, figure it out. But it really appalls me that the thought of BLM land being used for a landfill. I mean, it's just, if you read what they represent to the American people, not to me, not to Powell Butte, but to all of us. I mean, it should really be taken into consideration not to use a BLM site. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet Trisella.
Hello, my name is Janet Trusello. I live at 65833 Fazio Lane in Juniper Preserve. And I've already written a letter and that's on record. I won't reiterate any of that. I wanted to say thank you to the SWAC, impressive work that you're doing here, and we appreciate your efforts. The only thing that I would like to get on the record, the 5-mile buffer for the airport. I do understand that you've taken that into account, but there is a distinction in the Federal Aviation Investment and Reform Act, Air 21, whether either airport qualifies for Air 21. It's a 6-mile buffer if they do qualify. So I wanted to make sure that that was included in the criteria. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Patricia Lucas.
Good morning. I'm Patricia Lucas. I live at 65950 Pronghorn Estates Drive in Juniper Preserve. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of all of these sites, and thank you for your consideration of removing the Powell Butte site. My husband and I did submit written document for this. The only thing that I would bring up is, while you look at the existing population in these resorts, there's a significant number of additional people that can move in that has yet to be developed. There are 750 home sites in Brasada Ranch and 370 in Juniper Preserve. Thank you very much for listening to my testimony.
Thank you. I think this is out of James Bond. There's just M. John Vaughn.
Thank you. I'll be brief. Your proposed action to remove the Powell Butte Highway site takes care of most of my concerns. But I do want to bring up something I think is a bigger concern from the process that's going on here. I live in Crook County. I spent a lot of money and a lot of time in Deschutes County, but I don't get to vote here. Remember there. And the minute this site came up, which I understand borders from the Crook County, Deschutes County border, I wonder why the red lights didn't come on, and immediately those that live in Crook County weren't notified. Because the only reason I'm here in this is through word of mouth coming from my neighbors on Brasada Ranch, and they've been very helpful. All of my neighbors to the north of us, and there's over 100 of them in Powell Butte View Estates, are totally ignorant of what's going on here from the unofficial sampling I made over the back fence. So they don't know anything about it. So we live in a state that has very strong, coordinated, comprehensive land use plans. That should be the background, the whole fabric within which this investigation takes place, and that requires public notice. And probably if you're going to put a landfill right on the county borders, Crook County needs to be sitting there with us. Yeah, but you reached the right conclusion in spite of that procedural part of my. Thank you. I do have one technical thing, and we can take care of this later. I noticed that there was a very good rating given to the Powell Butte site because of low eagle impacts. come on out in the spring when the nesting golden eagles from up north of us are hunting on my property. My wife and I live there together. My wife is part of this here, but both bald eagles and golden eagles are significant residents, seasonal out there. And I think to say there's few impacts is inaccurate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Marcy O'Reilly.
Good morning. My name is Marcy O'Reilly and I'm a property owner at Brasada Ranch. I want to thank the committee for hearing the public outcry and recognizing the impacts that it could have on everybody and hopefully removing Powell Butte from the list. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And the last one on the list here is Chris Klein. Okay. Sue, are there any hands raised up?
I did not sign up, but I would like to.
Yeah, please come on up.
Hi, my name is Cindy Magidson. I live out at Pronghorn. Thank you very much for considering removing that particular landfill site. I would like to just point out, and my husband and I sent a letter in, but two things that just as you're looking at future things as well. The landfills we know attract birds. I know the restriction may be 5 or 6 miles, but those two airports, Redmond and Bend, are very high traffic. In fact, Bend is the 3rd busiest airport in the state with its takeoffs and landings. A lot of training out there, a lot of traffic between the two airports with student pilots. And if it's going to fly anywhere near a landfill, that's really looking for trouble in terms of bird strikes. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the room? Sue, is there anybody online with a hand raised? No? Okay. With this, I'll close public comment. Thank you very much for your comments. I will address a couple things. One, it's been mentioned in letters, and it was mentioned here on why don't we just ship materials to Arlington landfill? So the county went through, or Roosevelt landfill, the county went through a solid waste master planning process in 2018, 2019. Pretty extensive, about almost a year-long process as to how to manage our waste stream for the next several generations. With Knott landfill coming to its impending closure, many different approaches were considered during that process, from waste to energy to hauling materials to Arlington or Roosevelt, potential other technologies such as waste to fuel, amongst other things. The consensus of that committee was that Deschutes County should continue to manage its waste stream within the county. The costs and risks of long haul, some of those were around climate gas emissions from the long haul of waste, 130 miles to 200 miles, depending on which landfill we would go to, was of significant concern. Cost was concern, with winter weather and some of the challenges of long haul as we have to go through passes and other inclement weather, as well as the fact that Deschutes feels that we should not be hoisting our waste onto other communities, that it should stay here and that we are accountable and responsible for it. That said, as we go forward, in addition to this process of looking at the potential siting of this facility in the county, we will concurrently be looking at the alternatives from a cost perspective, risk perspective, and that will also not only come to the SWAC, but to our County Board of Commissioners for consideration. So we are looking to site a landfill here in the county. We are looking to build out significant diversion capacity here in the county so that our waste stream is smaller than it is today as we recover more, and that we will continue to look at alternatives until a final either facility is sited or it is not. So it is still being considered, but it was looked at pretty extensively back in 2018-19, and by the vote of the county commissioners, it was determined that we should continue to manage the waste here in the county and try and locate a facility here in the county. In regards to the airport, we've had a number of conversations with both local airports as well as the FAA and state flight regulators. This discussion around what boundary rule has come up several times. Is it 10,000 feet? Is it 5 miles? Is it 6 miles? I believe the 6 miles is very specific to certain conditions around grant funding. I think what is the FOR grant, Chad? Make it specific to the 6 mile. That doesn't apply currently to the airport, so it's not under that consideration. But it is something that we've had to look at quite a bit. It's been brought to our attention. So with that, I want to open this up to the SWAC members for any discussion in terms of thoughts or concerns about the staff recommendation and wanting to pull this off of further consideration. So it's open for conversation or your concurrence that we should remove these from further consideration.
I have one question online.
Yeah, is this Chris?
Yes, it is. Thank you. So I recently read an article in the paper talking about the incorporation of a new community out east of town. And I wonder, maybe this is a question for county legal, but if, if a new city was incorporated east of town, would that limit the ability of the county to site a landfill within city limits?
Stephanie Marshall here is with the county legal department.
I don't have my phone at this desk here. Let me know if you can hear me all right.
I can hear you.
Hi. Yes, that's an excellent question. A couple of things. The consideration of whether the petition to incorporate will be put forward to the voters will be considered by the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners on September 20th. So that's the first step that's coming up next month. If it is sent on to the voters, then it'll be put onto the next election. It probably won't be in time for the November election, so I don't know exactly when that would be coming forward in the spring. Yes, there would be some impact on siting if the city is incorporated. Without going into a lot of detail, there are many steps that are required kind of between where we are right now and if it goes onto the ballot and what happens afterward. So there are numerous steps. I'm happy actually if it would be of some assistance to the SWAC to just do a very general overview memo that will be in the record for people to consider, as well as obviously the committee itself and the board when it comes before them sometime next year. So without really knowing, I mean, there, among other things, the boundary of the incorporated area would still be, to be determined. And so I really can't speak precisely as to how much impact or what that will do to the Moon site pit, or Moon Pit site. But, you know, I will acknowledge that, there are some potential, ramifications if the petition is put forward to the voters and if the voters, approve that. I hope that's
Thank you.
helpful.
Yeah,
in
that's
general.
really helpful. Yeah, I totally acknowledge that there's a lot of moving parts here, and so it's hard to say what can and will happen before some of these decisions are made. But at the same time, it feels, and I don't want to throw a wrench in the plans, but I don't know if it makes sense to start lopping off some of the other potential sites if this, you know, if the city gets incorporated and then we have fewer sites to choose from. I don't know. I just want to have a conversation about it.
The boundary for the city included this site or just was on the border of this? The Roth East.
The boundary actually includes both the Roth East
Both.
and Moon Pit as proposed.
Oh, and Moon Pit as well?
Yeah, yeah. It goes all the way, it goes in, it goes into the Badlands. And it looks like it will include some of the Badlands. Stephanie, if the city does incorporate, then it becomes a question of whether we would have to negotiate with the host community, which would be with the city itself. Okay.
Right. And I'm also a matter of getting their own regulations into place. Again, I'm happy to prepare a memo. I think we will have a lot more information come September 20th after the hearing that the board is going to hold on the petition itself.
And Chris, I would comment that we don't have to look at keeping both on the list either. We since the Highway 20 site and the Powell Butte site both scored in essence the same. If we wanted to hold one site and let one site go, but by holding the site, that means moving it forward through the process of potentially getting legislative support, because that could not stop if we want to potentially cite something there.
So, Tim, so with an even score between the two, does staff have a recommendation on which one to keep and which one to get rid of, or no?
Well, I would say kind of logistically, I think that we have not heard to date any comments in regards to the Highway 20 site or concerns. We've heard significant concerns, and since this is a legislative action, I think that there would be some significant different difficulties between the Powell Butte site from the Highway 20 site.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, there are more residential properties in proximity to the Powell Butte site.
That's correct.
Than to the Highway 20 site. Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts or comments from the SWAC members online?
Well, I didn't understand that the Moon Pit was also included in the proposed city boundary. I didn't notice it when I looked at the map that was in the media. It seems that, I think your recommendation makes sense in terms of removing them from the reasons that you said, but retaining the Highway 20 site at this point probably makes some sense. It certainly poses a set of challenges for Moon Pit and that site. But I think we need to continue to have some options, continue to look at.
You want to make a motion?
Yeah. I mean, do you guys have opinions about that? I guess I'd put a motion on the table that we retain the Highway 20 site for now. And remove the Powell Butte site.
I'll second that.
Okay, so I have one comment. If that's the case, Ryan, I mean, that's when you will go through your pieces of all your criteria again. For the Highway 20 site. Sure. If the Highway 20 site is scheduled to remain as an option, you would have to go through the same criterion scoring for that site to further details to make sure that would, or you already completed it at this point.
Yeah,
Okay,
they've completed it. So then the next steps would be that we would actually potentially take it to the local rep, have conversations with local representatives and the BLM around whether they would support taking this for federal action.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we'll have would be working through the BLM, especially a timeline as well to meet the 2029 timeline. But as Mike said, that, I mean, it leaves an option if the incorporated potential city does happen, then you need to have some options to look at otherwise.
What's the timeline for the Board of County Commissioners to take an action here?
The hearing will be on September 20th. So, depending on whether they leave the record open, you know, and when they deliberate, you know, I would make a broad estimate that, a decision would be no later than, say, a few weeks, a month later. But I can't guarantee that. All I know is that the hearing's on the 20th. And as people have commented, there are moving parts. The board will have the discretion to decide we need more information or not, and then deliberate and then make a decision. So what that looks like is anytime between September 20th, whatever a week later is, September 28th, and mid-October, late October, just to kind of have some bookends for planning purposes. And I also want to mention that it is a public process, the incorporation. So it's great to see so many people here, submitting comments in this process. And so if you have concerns or information or support, any of the above for the incorporation, there's information online for you to submit comments and or come to the on the 20th.
How many homes, how many residents are in this group?
I believe that there are 77 homes. And however, that's one of the fact finding exercises that the board will make is how many residents are actually within the proposed incorporated limits. That's not been finally determined.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep. So there is a motion to stop consideration of the Powell Butte site and continue with the consideration of the Highway 20 site. We could potentially hold the Highway 20 site for further action with representatives until we've heard what's going on in regards to the Mountain View proposal.
I mean, and there's no question that there's a whole set of hurdles there.
Yeah.
That are unique to the BLM properties, so.
Yeah. Yeah. Our concern as staff is we don't necessarily want to move the process through the through the legislative process and then say, our bad. Yeah. Yeah. So.
More about retaining it as an option for further
Yeah.
analysis down the road, depending on the outcome of some of this other.
Yeah. All right. So any other conversation from members of the SWAC?
Just to be clear, there's 4 of us on this call, on this meeting.
No, there are,
other people
Paul
besides Chris?
Patagna.
Oh, okay. All right.
Robin Jones.
Missed that part.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other discussion or conversation?
I just have one last question in regards to the Powell Butte site. I know you guys are making a motion to possibly eliminate that site. But I haven't seen studies in the correspondence in Powell Butte as to obviously the environment, the airport issue, all the other factors. But our aquifers, okay, has there been studies on the water issues that may come up?
Yeah, but I'll respond to that after we complete this motion. So, all in favor of moving to remove the Powell Butte site from, further consideration and to hold the Highway 20 site pending outcome of the, Mountain View, vote.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Yep. In regards to the question about water, when we move a site into, well, maybe you can respond to it, Ryan.
Sure. At the focus screening level, we have hydrogeologists that look at publicly available data on aquifers, look at well logs and the lithology and different layers that are present. And they assign a score based on the depth of groundwater and the confining layers in between the site and the groundwater depth. So it's looked at a cursory level with publicly available information. But then in the final site evaluation phase that we're in now, we conduct more on-site field work to better understand the hydrogeology and the risks of groundwater contamination for that particular site.
Okay. So for the SWAC, our next meeting in September is a open house. So our formal any action meeting will be meeting in October. So we'll be sending out details both of the open house and then information in regards to our next meeting. There will be.
Time set for October.
What's that?
Is the date and time set for October?
Sue, do you have the date and time? It'd be the third Tuesday at 9 a.m.
The same schedule that we're on.
Same schedule that we're on.
The open house is on September 11th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's a Monday.
Yeah. And that is from 5 to 7. Is that correct, Sue? What's that? 5:30. Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank all the members of the SWAC for your consideration and your continued work on this project and process. So with that, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
That was exciting.
It was.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.